Yeah.
So I'm they, them.
I'm she, her, Sophie.
I'm she, her.
Okay, cool.
Who is they, them? Okay. They said.
Okay, we are live.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for being here on site in San Marino and also online, connected online. I'm Simone Frange, I'm one of the 9 curators of School of Waters, Mediterranean 19, and I'm here streaming live from National Gallery with Joanna Bruckner, one of the participating artists of the Biennale. And we are connected with Sophie Utikal in Berlin. Hi, Sophie.
Hello. Hi, Simona and Johanna and Ru.
Hello.
And Ru from Korea.
Hi.
So thank you very much for joining us today for this new event of Digital Swamp, which is the expanded opening program of School of Waters Mediterranean 19. As you have been seeing in our social media and website, the Biennale is opening its venues and its activity here on site in San Marino. But Digital Swamp, as a digital opening, is also accompanying us throughout this journey of 3 days, and it will be also accompanying us throughout the entire next week. The aim of Digital Swamp is to allow people attending the Biennale from afar to get in contact with the work of the artists and also have some kind of experience of this collective moment that we are having here in San Marino, and also to activate some focuses on the works and the practices of artists participating to the Biennale. Queer Methodologies is a conversation. It's a very informal conversation among myself, Ru, Joanna, and Sophie. We are going to discuss and talk around this idea of queer methodology, which is a concept that we take from Jack Albestrom from the book Female Masculinity. And it's a concept that will allow us to find a sort of a point of encounter between different perspectives and practices that can be inhabiting this semantic landscape of queerness. So the idea is we know that queerness is also a conflicted territory and also a space of non-belonging. So the idea is also to give as much voices to different perspectives on this idea. What we would like to do today is to understand queer and queerness as a working methodology, but also as a methodology that has an impact in social justice. So this talk that we are having tonight is deeply in tune with the previous activity that we had this week. And I'm talking about the lecture of Giulia Gregnanin called Marina for Feminist Resignification of Summer is Myth, that was in support and in solidarity with a very important struggle that is happening right now in San Marino, which is a struggle for the legalization of abortion. So the Biennale stands aside to people that give birth, subjects that can give birth, and they also have to have access to self-determination in their reproductive health and in social justice. So this talk is actually, again, an activity in support of this very important struggle that is super important in 2021. I will just give some brief introduction about the concept of queer methodology, and then we will have a first roundtable with Ru, Joanna, and Sophie, just to understand how in their practice they relate to this concept methodologically. And also we will have a second conversation, maybe more focused on the pieces and the work and the practices that they are bringing here in the space of School of Water, the Biennale, which, as you understood, is a very fluid space because it's physical and digital at the same time. So we are very interested in this idea of queer methodology, or better said, methodologies, which is actually a plural idea that Jack Albestrom defined a necessity for practices to remain supple enough, I'm quoting, to respond to the various location of information and betrays a certain disloyalty to conventional disciplinary methods. And in the end of the short chapter, which is dedicated to this idea of queer methodology in the book Female Masculinity, Albertson says the queer methodology is a scavenger methodology that uses different methods to collect and produce information on subjects who have been deliberately or accidentally excluded from traditional studies on the human being. The queer methodology attempts to combine methods that are often cast as being at odds with each other, and it refuses the academic compulsion towards disciplinary coherence. So we are pretty much interested in different aspects that Albertson is bringing out from this concept of queerness, especially the idea that a queer methodology is a methodology that is about stitching different references together. It's about collecting, it's about creating excellent archives, and also it's about the idea of opposing to coherent subjectivities and actually to this call for transparency and coherence, both in our subjectivation practices, but also in our work as artists and cultural producers. So I would start to pass the mic to our guests and maybe to have a first insight from their side on this topic, on this idea of queer methodology. And I would start maybe with Joanna, who's here next to me, and who's presenting a complex installation in the venue of Sums here in San Marino. I'm just giving some details also about the locations of the pieces so that you can also connect when you come here physically to traverse the Biennale.
Good. Hello. Thank you very much for this very nice introduction. It's very dense. I'm very happy to discuss with you today. I think it can actually extend. So between across the short frame here. But of course, I have different perspectives on queer methodology, and also depending on each context where I realize it or where I work it out in comparison to, for example, with when I work with living bodies, or when I actually transcend the real body and go into other spheres of bodily or transcorporeal conceptions of what the body is. But let's start probably actually with those bodies that are usually on site in social settings, where according to certain research questions, for example, they connect to urban reorganization processes, that connect to urban redevelopment processes, where I set up social settings and bodies with whom I work in these spaces, create languages like affective languages that sort of create an in-betweenness, whose in-betweenness shapes the poetic between the body, and this in-between is constantly in transition. And we don't know this language that emerges from this transition. We are also, in that sense, we are co-transition. So we are no longer our body. So we are set in the public space, for example, but we transition because we are in response to each other through the affective languages that we create within the dialogue, within the specific research questions that I bring into. So it's hard work. We sweat a lot. It's actually an organism that we set up, and this organism develops into a kind of being. We don't know what being it is, be it artificial, be it more than human, or and through the affective languages, these poetics of movement come together as an ecology, and they transfers into infinite space, into outer space as a sort of transcorporeal. And also through the affects, like for me, the affective force is also resisting kind of in response to how algorithms penetrate our bodies and extract data. And in this process, there's also a lot of resistance when we conceive of how these processes depend on the affective body itself, on intimacies. And as we know, for example, in my last work, molecular sex, I've been presenting a sex robot, and was challenging how to a certain up how normative our intimacies are determined for the future. And also our pleasures guided through certain apps, how we interact in dining, also in reproductive questions. And so, like, I tried with the transcorporeality that I set up in my work. I try to transcend those like what technology does with us, and I try to conceive of certain technologies, like also we find in public space, in urban space. So we're surrounded by technology, but they also multiply us and can conceive us as multiplicities. And in this more than entangled worlds, this transness, or transness as I would call it, we find spaces. We find we create those startups that constantly reserve somewhere else and set up these densities of explosion in itself and homogenities of solid explosions of material. And of course, I can expand, but probably that's more.
I would maybe ask also to Sophie to relate to what Joanna said, because Joanna emphasized a lot the dimension of intimacy and also public intimacy, and also this idea of transfer plurality, which can maybe relate to the idea of collectivity or something which is more collective than collectivity, more in common than commons. So I will maybe ask you to expand a little bit on these concepts, given that your work has a interesting and very profound collective nature also, not in just in the thinking process, but also in the making. And I would like also you to expand a little bit on your ecological drive, which is so present in your work and in your pieces.
Thanks, Simona. If you hear strange sounds, it's my dog. Is that something is going out outside? I don't know. Yeah, it's a very dense topic, I think. I have to think a bit. What I liked now with Johanna was that your emphasis on the body, especially, this stood out to me because it's also something I do a lot in my works. And this idea also of stitching together several layers of meaning, but also spheres, is also something that I do in my work. I'm a textile artist. I don't know if you know this, but I did a textile art series for San Marino for the Biennale, which was inspired by a book. I have it here called Undrowned by Alexis Pauline Gams. And it's, you can see Black feminist lessons from marine mammals. And it's a very beautiful book where she structures the book with several chapters, and it's called like chapter 1, listen, breathe, remember, practice, collaborate, be vulnerable, be present, and so on. And she takes like important, influential thinkers from Black feminism and connects them with marine mammals and uses these mammals as metaphors for agency or empowerment or how to take care of each other as a collective. And so I'm also interested in my works to look into the future, and especially now for San Marino, I created a three-piece series where it's about me traveling to the future and looking back. So in the future where all the marine animals are dead, and looking back, and what is there to be done then? So one work is called Remember, the other Grief, and the other is Change. And the whole series is called I Thought We Had More Time. And yeah, so I wanted to kind of imagine how it will be in a way, because I think this is what will come to us, that as the politics are continuing, it's not enough. And I don't think it will be enough. It's kind of a pessimistic view on what will come. In difference to Alexis Pauline Gams, she's very optimistic of the future, but me personally, I'm not. And of course, this creates a lot of anxiety in myself, and I try then to translate this feeling into an image in a way, because I feel like text cannot really translate the complexity of feelings. And I think art is very great method for this, because it's not too concrete in a way. It opens up a lot of different layers and ways of interpreting it, the meaning. And the same is also with feelings, that you cannot really pin a feeling to a word or a language. It's always limited. And I feel art is kind of limitless. And this is what I try to do in my works.
Thank you, Sophie.
Yes.
I would use also some concept that you raised to pass the mic to Ru and actually ask them a little bit about their practice in general, because Ru's practice is deeply inhabited by marine imaginaries and also by water and fluids in general as methodologies, but also Ru, you have a very strong intersectional perspective and intersectional position, and also Black feminism was an important source in your work, but also how Black feminism is associated to other kind of struggle, intersectional feminist perspectives. So I would maybe ask you a little bit to expand on this and how you translate this through your practice, which is a multidisciplinary and touches upon different media.
Yeah, thank you for that. As you said, yeah, my practice does, I guess, take many forms, and it's mostly video and installation, but also text. And I think for this biennial, something also different from what I've been doing. I guess something that ties my practice together is my desire to use art in deconstructing different kinds of oppression that can be linked to ideologies of domination. And to be more specific, the work I'm presenting in San Marino, or I will be, is more closely linked to hydrofeminism as developed by Estrida Nimanes, and this idea of looking at how water is used by humans and thinking about what water can teach us. So I guess we'll talk about this in the second part of this conversation, but I think in looking at different examples of how water is used around the world, my main focus is on talking about who is actually responsible in guise of water. So yeah.
Can you maybe tell us a little bit more about your working methodology, because you've been conducting very strong projects, for example, about French colonial past, and now French colonial past is linked also to what we call Far Orient, actually, in general, and how actually this colonial past is constantly influencing also imaginaries related to Asian people of diaspora in Europe, for example, and maybe how actually intersectional methodologies, feminist and queer intersectional methodologies helped you to frame this spectrum of coloniality.
So I think my work is constantly shifting, and as I'm sure it is the case for everyone, it has a lot to do with like my geographic location. So this work I was doing in relation to French coloniality was, I carried it out when I was in France, and living in France as a person who is read as an AFAB Asian person. So there was like this desire, I think, to just get to the bottom of what it was that I was living. And in that sense, I found an archival image, which was a lithography entitled "Peoples of Europe, Defend Your Holiest Possessions." So this was made in the context of the Russo-Japanese War, and basically created by the German Kaiser at the time, William II, in order to create solidarity between European nations against this image of Asia that was reduced to a figure of Buddha in flames. So just like this image of simplified fear. And the way I worked through this image was by taking different elements of the original image and translating it into a physical space. But it was also important for me to link contemporary research into populations in Germany, which led me to talk about socialist links between East Germany and North Vietnam, seeing as Vietnamese people constitute the largest number of East Asians in Germany today. So there's this history of migration that is only validated through the economical gains that the migrant brings, in a sense, and is carried out to this day. So I guess, yeah, there's this way in which I work, which kind of carries me through different stories and different locations, because they are linked by coloniality and because they are linked by the stories that are present.
Right. Thank you, Ru. Maybe ask Sophie to expand on something that Ru just said, which is this question of aces and also being read as, also this idea of being interpreted as a body in a very specific location and situation. And your work, Sophie, has been inspiring a lot this idea of being read as a women of color in a whiteness-oriented society. So a society which is heavily constructed around whiteness. And so I would maybe ask you to expand on this, also knowing that we talk a lot about the coloniality of gender, also from Maria Lugones, and also how coloniality relates a lot to gender construction, especially on with gender binary. So I would ask you a little bit to expand on this, especially also on the community work that you do with your own peers that has a very important role in your work and in your understanding also of the world around you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I would say being read as woman of color or also as Black woman, like I don't identify as Black, but in my community, it has very alienating effects towards your own body. And if this happens, it's like very exhausting because you cannot leave your body. Like the body is the ultimate place or your ultimate home, but growing up in a white society, this is the effect you have that comes up. So I believe that the body in general in this being read as is like the point, like the most vulnerable part of it. But it in a way also has the biggest potential for healing. So in my community work, it's a lot about the body as a source of healing and as a way of creating agency again over our lives. And I also try to do this in my work. So my work is always depicting a woman of color in the scene, and I always try to create something like an empowering moment to it. And in a way, for other women of color who have also grown up like me in a white society, to have like a short moment of I'm not alone in this, and there are other people here, and kind of like to give solace. I think it's a word in English. In German, it's Trost. Like as yeah, that's the idea I have with my works. And yeah, I also, when I do workshops for this, for body awareness or also for writing. And this, I always use the body as a starting point. And it has been very, very powerful because you go straight to the wound, but that's the only way to find the healing. Yeah.
Thank you, Sophie. You bring up another very important question that it's inhabiting a lot the work of you three in general, which is the dimension of alienation and healing. And Joanna has been working a lot recently on this idea of alienation in relationship to queer pornography and also to pornography that goes online. So there is also this very strong dimension of the virtualization of the going digital, the becoming digital. So I will maybe use this transition to go a little bit more in depth about your last production that you're presenting here in School of Waters, maybe starting especially from this idea of alienation and how alienation and empowerment, or alienation and liberation conflict in conflict.
Yeah, so in this work that you see here in the Biennial, it's a two-channel installation, which also speaks with each other. It's not synchronized. I would like to have bring to the surface articulation like usual performance articulations, which are not synchronized, which never reveal an aesthetic experience, but which always speak anew again to each other. And also together with the sound, they always create a new aesthetic experience, which very much also responds to, let's say, actually to a form of queerness, because we've been talking about methodology, and that I'll shortly come into it more deeply into the practice, but where I see something polymorphic. Polymorphos is a term I've been using a lot in my work, and it's I've described it a little bit before, but it describes those relations that what is created interterminate, but it go also in many directions in order to make new connection points ubiquitously in every situation. So for me, the body is not placed into the world, but more born out of a specific specific dynamics in its world, of course. And in these ideas, I've been very much focusing when now I've been working on net pornography, or also called post pornography. And here I have also different perspectives on the material, but I've been engaging with porn initiatives from around the world who actually conceive their porn performances as cyber struggles, as materializing social assemblages on the internet, while they conceive the performance within the space, so the consumption and production of the performance is blurred. Consumption, production, and circulation is blurred. They also are in charge of who has access, and also challenge, of course, commercialization by setting up their own platforms. So they conceive of their performances as prosthetics bodies, becoming prosthetics while they are performing internet, and while becoming prosthetics, opening up their bodies to the unbounded space where their data fails the productive, actually those value machines of the internet, those that perform beyond the human engines that are serving the internet as a machine, that they escape. They're actually the failed data that's that exists in grams, in cybernetic ruptures, in non-existence, but while they become existent. So yeah, I give space to these fugitive data, which I would also call it the Florent bridges or trans or queer data, in addition to it. And while like in these non-existent spaces where these non-productive data lands, they form again corporealities, but in relation, in affinities to each other, outside of a language. And while I'm trying to give these languages in my work, I'm trying to give these practices languages without a name. I'm really working from bottom up, from the material, and let it collide in my work and let it self-perform. So here again, I'm influenced of yeah, by actually Karen Barada, quantum physics. Probably know all some theories around matter continuously touching itself by reproducing itself by touching itself, and so like the queerness of matter. but also the agencies of matter in that. And I connect to the bodies that I see trying to find to escape, then actually to escape into the atmospheric escape is another of my recent works, which I'm called where I form speculative compositions in outer space, entangling with the waste, some decolonization processes. So like trying to their question, like how the outer space is more being made habitable, which occupy the language of certain scientific languages, because there's a lot of queerness also regarding the black gases in outer space. But yeah, all these come together again in this work that I have here now, where yeah, the bodies they form the transcorporealities, yeah. So I give this, yeah, let's say actually in the collision between labored sensation and technology, they form what is not speakable and what is not allowed to speak. But in this, together with their initiatives, and actually I also have dialogues with them, I let them speak in the languages that I create in my work with them.
Thank you, Joanna. We've been exploring, like, really in detail this notion of alienation, also in relationship to data and big data as well, which is a very structural component of our current being. But also we went into some territories, like the territory of grief that Sophie was bringing out just before, which are in a certain way related to Ruth's work, and especially the work that Ruth is presenting here, which is a lot about, let's say, grief and death in a way. Because Ruth, you are working on a very specific case study, very pertinent to your current location, which is Korea. And you are trying to translate actually an analysis, I would say, also an intersectional analysis of this process that pushes body towards death through an installation that will be seen in July, in the moment of the on the performative festival that we are organizing here in July. And actually, in this idea of accompanying sonically the visitor towards an experience that recompose this very specific moment that you are analyzing. So I've been talking a little bit mysteriously because I didn't want to expand too much, and I just want you to tell us a little bit about the origin of your work, of your piece that you're presenting here, which kind of preoccupations actually brought you to get into this very specific Korean tradition that you are exploring, like not tradition, but routine, and how you think of unfolding the installation. What do you think that this installation could create in the visitor as a form of consciousness, I would say, about the topic? I think you have to turn on your mic. Thank you.
Gotcha. Yeah, to expand a little bit on what you've been saying, the case studies I'm working on, there are 3 specific ones and 3 specific locations. So the first one is in Korea. It's in Seoul. There's a large river called the Han River, and there are more than 20 bridges that connect, either parts of this river. But there is one bridge that's called the Mapo Bridge, which was the location considered most popular as a location of suicide. This has been going on for a while, and it dates back to before the internet was such a large part of our lives, because the proximity of this bridge to the financial district in Yeouido meant that people who mostly failed investors would come from that financial district and use the bridge to end their lives. And after that, even to this day, it is a location that is sought out. And in 2012, the City of Seoul and Samsung Life Insurance actually created a project on the bridge in order to address this and kind of try to lessen like the number of deaths that were happening on this bridge. And what they did was they wrote different phrases along the banisters, the railings of the bridge, and they called it the Bridge of Life. But what this project actually did was it ended up increasing the number of suicides committed on the bridge by a very dramatic number, which I believe was 16 times. And people actually started calling it the suicide bridge. So there was one phrase on this bridge that said, eye, nose, mouth, ear, forehead, chin, cheekbone, eyebrow, just facial features. I guess I think we can imagine like why they were written there, but this was one example. And the second, in relation specifically to the context of San Marino and the Mediterranean, was the use by European nations and agencies such as Frontex to, in a sense, blame the Mediterranean Sea for the death of people crossing it. And the third case study, I guess, was this kind of therapy called sensory deprivation therapy, which is also known as isolation tanks. This practice of using heavily salted water in isolated tanks in order to induce different feelings of euphoria, different therapeutic effects, which also include, according to some people, near-death experiences. So what this translates to in my installation is I use fiction. I talk about a giant who was shipwrecked at a point in time, traveling west from a point in space. And as the giant was shipwrecked, the head fell off. It broke off of its body and it sank. And it's basically a recounting of these different uses of water through the waters that accompany this solitude in the deep sea. So as Simone said, this is going to be a part of the performance festival in July, and it will take place in a former railway which connected San Marino and Rimini. So the visitors will be walking through the space, which in a sense will be the missing body of the giant, and connecting to the different facial features of the head through that body. So that's basically like what it's going to be like.
Thank you so much. We are currently going towards the end of our conversation, and I would like to pick up one suggestion that Ru gave in their presentation of the work, which is the question of fiction. And your work, Ru, Sophie, and Joanna, is deeply inhabited by speculation, speculative fiction, and fiction in general. So I would just maybe ask Sophie to start the last round of our conversation, expanding a little bit on this use of fiction also as a form of resistance, I would say, and also as a form of reform of certain imaginaries that are currently colonizing our bodies. So I would maybe ask you to expand a little bit on this idea of fiction, how you use fiction and speculation. Which are your references in this? Because I know there are strong references in literature, for example, and how you translate this into installation and textile work.
Thanks. It's a great question. I love fiction because I feel it's so accessible. And this is its great power it has to reach so many people through the language and through emotional cues in a way, because with fiction you can create totally new worlds and become reach very emotional levels, which I believe are super, like this is our biggest strength, is lying where our emotions are. This is where the motivation comes for change, I believe, or transformation. And using fiction as a door to open certain layers in ourselves, I think it's the best way to do it, or it's the most efficient. And so especially for me, myself, I can say, if I read a non-fictional text, usually I forget about it, but a story for me always stays. And I think this has been it's part of human history, that stories are used to tell a bigger part of information that is translated into a story. So for me, my references, of course, is Octavia Butler a lot, because she uses this science fiction as a way to comment on the present moment, on society, and uses science fiction as a big metaphor or kind of a warning. Like if we don't wake up now, the future looks really bad for everyone. Or she, in a way, I don't know if you read this book, Parable of the Sower, which she wrote in the, what was it, early 90s, late 80s, about 2024, the year of now, which is so accurate, it's scary. So, and this for me has a huge impact on how I see the world and really changes a lot my view on society. So I believe very much in fiction, and I think art is the best place to use and adapt the methodologies of fiction. Yeah.
Thank you, Sophie. Joanna, what do you want to add about fiction? Maybe also this idea of fiction as a form of resistance, and maybe also elaborating on this relationship between pessimism and optimism. How do you see the future through the lens of your own practice?
Yeah, so for me, fiction is also very important if you see my work. And for me, it's important that I set up through fiction metaphors that carve out spaces for imagination. So imagination of different temporalities, of non-linear perspectives of time, which I always try to set up in my work. And so time escaping from the screen or from the instrument, from the tool in which we encounter the work, but time in a linear way escaping into keep placing ourselves and differently related to actually what we see. So there's always a going back and forth stream, like this polymorph that I've explained before. And here I also I carve this fiction by certain elements that appear in my work, and where I ask the author, those who encounter the work, to be able to set up thinking structures, because for me art is very important to go beyond the routines and realities that we can learn or educated to think, but to open up new realms, and also how non-human material and bodily material relates to my work is always, I think, it's quite mythical. It continuously explodes with itself, and there new worlds are being created. So like the fiction is where it always comes out from the image, and while I feed my feed from below. So when I work with, for example, dancers, what I said in the beginning, it's always, I never tell them what to do, but everything comes from below. And also it's fiction, so in these explosions that I create in the image, it comes from what it is, from its dynamics, how it is in the world, and redistributing itself. So yeah, I'm in that way. I think for me, the future always starts in the present. I think we have to very importantly work on the present and question, of course, what the technologies do with us, whom, and so I'm very critical, of course, when we encounter technology, how we have access to it, how we can participate in it. I think we really have to question this and unsettle it and challenge, like queer the access to technology. And I use fiction to queer, let's say, access to technology and ask for whom and from whom, for whom. I think it's a very important question, and not just participate like how I and what it does with us. And for me, through the images, I challenge this and I try to set up new spaces of thinking structures for the future, but not in the future, because we are in the present, we have to fix the present in order to be ready to make a traces for the future, but we have to make them in the present.
Thank you, Anna. Ru, maybe we can start also with you with this idea of fiction, how you use fiction in your work, but also maybe this idea that Joanna just brought up, the idea of queering access to. And I would also like to ask you, how do you queer your access to history? Because you've been a lot inquiring on queer presences in Korean history recently in your latest, for example, ceramic installations, or the work that you're doing on Korean visual culture, and also art history. So I would like to ask you a little bit about fiction, but also to shift a little bit the gaze on the past, so how fiction can help us to rethink past, which is actually a category that belongs to the linear conception of time. So it's not universal, as we know. So I would like to ask you to expand a little bit on these topics.
Yeah. It makes me also think of this idea that Jack Halberstam wrote about in Queer Violence and Imagined Violence, which I guess to sum it up in a sense would be a comment on the necessity of queer violence in representation as something that disrupts reality. And I guess that's also like what fiction can do. And through art, we can imagine things that are possible. In the work that I titled Tax Returns, I take two fragments in history that are, in a sense, unrelated, but I link them in the work. So one is the practice of these ceramic plates. So in the 15th century in Korea, or in Joseon, the dynasty at the time, there was a method of tax payments that was offered to ceramic artisans where they could just give the palace plates with the names of the locations, the palace branches where the plates would be used. And the second fragment of this work is in the same period in time. Research I carried out in queerness, about queerness, because like archives are something that only really existed if you had the means of recording what was happening. I couldn't really find much as I wanted to about queer life outside of the palace, but I did find more about the court ladies, or 궁녀 in Korean. And there was a practice between these court ladies where they would tattoo the letter 붕, which means friend today, on each other's arms and buttocks. So I used this work to link these stories, but I also took into consideration the context I was working from, which was in the Kim Hae Clay Art Museum, a public institution. So I was in this residency, a ceramic residency, and as all most public institutions are. It was run on public funds. So I used the exhibition to hand out the ceramic plates I made with the letter Bung inscribed on the surface as a way of returning the citizens some of their tax money. Yeah.
Thank you very much. This opens up a lot. Also, I think there is an interest from Sophie in this on this topic, because her work has been working a lot on this bodily part, I would say, also as a space of reclamation of rights, so and also of resistance. So I think there is a lot going on among you three, and so I'm very sad to end this conversation, this online conversation, because I have the impression that it could go fluidly and circularly on for hours. But this is just an appointment, maybe, that we give ourselves for the month of July, when we'll be hopefully all together here in San Marino. And I would like, by ending this conversation, also to recall that the Biennale stands aside Unione Donne Sammarinesi, and this second talk, actually, it's really important for us in order to underline solidarity with women and other subjects that are struggling here in the country for the legalization of abortion. So thank you very much for collaborating to this also very important political positioning for us with your own works and your own presence here, your own discourse. And by thanking you, I'll give you appointments. We'll meet all together in July here in San Marino. Thank you very much, Lou, Joanna, and Sophie. And
Thanks, Simona.
bye. Thank you so much.
Bye.